Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark, and today we will finally be getting into the deep dive, or at least the start of the deep dive, for the Fires of Ra Mega Adventure. Very quickly, before we get into this, I did want to tack on to an email that was sent last week asking about stacking bonuses. In the official Ulysses Discord, a question was asked that was relevant to that email, so I figured I would clarify that for any of our viewers and or listeners. We had discussed things about what it means to stack and that you only take the highest bonus or lowest negative, but there is an exception, which would be things that require shock. So there are some vitality perks as well as some vitality paths that have bonuses that are given, but you must suffer or take the shock damage. Since you are actually physically hurting yourself, those do stack, as well as things like cards. Cards can always stack as well. So I did want to just clarify those are a different category of perks and such, because they require the expenditure of shock, or they're just cards to use.
For the sake of being just 100% crystal clear, and those would also stack with conditions, correct? Like if you were stymied, or vulnerable, or size modifiers as well.
Yes, correct.
Or concealment,
all-out attack, etc.
Yes.
Okay.
Those bonuses negatives stack because they're for different reasons. So yes, those are kind of situation, scenario things, card things. When we look at perks and the effects of spells, miracles, and psionic powers, those do not, unless they would have that type of cost.
Yeah, no, and you can't mitigate the cost. If you mitigate the cost and it didn't cost you anything, you didn't pay the cost, so you don't get the bonus.
Right. You can have
Go ahead.
You can have a reduction. So if something costs 3 and you have something to reduce it to 2, that's fine. But if anything would reduce it flat out to 0, then there's no cost, there's no bonus. So, the next thing, we are getting into a mega adventure, so we will be doing lots and lots of spoiling the adventure. So if you are a player, you may wish to skip to our Delphi Council debriefings that do not have adventure information in those, and we won't go like 5 weeks doing mega adventure stuff. We will put in other things, but for this one, this is mostly Game Master. We'll go in, like I said, deep dive into each mega adventure. We'll talk about potential hangups, things that we found cool, things that we've altered, how our groups, both as Game Masters and players, how we did things differently or how we did things the same, etc., to give Game Masters out there more tools in their toolkit to have a successful Fires of Ra game. So that is our spoiler warning. So Jay had read the back of the book, which I think actually is good to set it up. So I will just parrot Jay. The Fires of Ra is a massive adventure suitable for several months of gaming. Get drawn into Dr. Mobius's schemes and follow a trail from Cairo to the far reaches of the realm that leads to Mobius's invincible flying fortress. Mobius isn't the only one with dastardly plans. Battle a bevy of bad guys on the way to an aerial showdown. Can you stop the Fires of Ra from burning entire cities into ash? So yes, this adventure hops all around in the Nile Empire. This was the second realm mega adventure, the first one being the God Box with the Living Land. The God Box was actually, and when we get into that, we'll say it again, but the God Box had 5 acts. This one had 7 acts, and then all of the mega adventures afterwards had 7. But I actually do have a little background information, so I thought that might be interesting. This was originally planned as a 5-act, similar to the God Box, and one of the authors was like, I can't write that little with the Nile Empire, and asked to expand it, so it became 7 acts, and then that just became the new norm. So if you're ever wondering why God Box only has 5 and everything else has 7, it's specifically because of the Fires of Ra. So that's just a little background in development. It is written for alpha characters, but on page 5 there is helpful hints, and you can look at our previous episode about beta clearance. If you are welcome to send beta clearance Storm Knights through it using either the previous episode or the stuff listed on page 5. But
one of the few alpha mega adventures.
Yes. Yeah, they a couple of them started, and then as time went on, they became more and more beta centric until the end, because then it was like, we went too far over, so yeah. let's pull back a little bit. So this is one of the, I want to say, the few that kind of gives more of a time of when it starts. The adventure background talks about the first 6 months of the invasion have been busy for this one of the main villains, the Hooded Cobra. So you can look at things at being a little after, say the 7th or so month. One thing that is good to know, if you like the idea of reoccurring villains or having some ties for your characters to see that it's not just, hey, we started this mega adventure and then we do the mega adventure and all the stuff within it kind of isn't pertinent otherwise. This one links to one of the Day 1 adventures, the Nile Empire Day 1 adventure, where some of the villains you meet, or your Storm Knights will meet, and then even you'll see a person turn into a villain as the players' characters turn into Storm Knights, which is kind of interesting. But this Fires of Ra has a group of villains that some of them, not all of them, but some of them are in that Day 1 adventure. So, Jay, what are some of your thoughts on the adventure background and getting into the before the first scene, like setting up how do you remember how you introduced your players to this?
I don't think I really went out of my way to do much setup, because at the time we were doing more just like, we were more play testing, like cyber papacy stuff, which I'll get into in a bit. So we just ran this after it came out. I know this had physically, I don't think it had physically come out, but I think I had the PDFs of it, right? So it had been released, but I believe we were playtesting cyber papacy stuff. So it was more of just hey, we need an adventure, let's go through this, it's been done. So these were new characters created specifically for it, so they didn't have too much of an introduction to it. And also we never played the Day 1 Nile Empire, so they didn't have any particular prior experience with the Hooded Cobra or Lady Hourglass or any of the ones that appeared in there. However, one of the players is like super into the Nile Empire, so anything I would feed him, he just gobbled up for it anyway. So I basically gave them like the briefest of intros for some of the background here, because a lot of it's just going to be what's in the Nile source book and talk about when certain stelae went down and when it fell and things like that. I think one of the things before we get fully into talking about each act and each scene is just a reminder, like what these kind of adventures were kind of designed for as almost travel logs
Yes.
for each invading realm. So you have 7 acts, and each act is dealing with a very different section of the Nile Empire, and in pretty much all of them, it's all like the sort of different zones and areas you could do. So it's kind of like a little sampler pack, and you could sort of see if there's a particular area that your players enjoyed more than others, like Cairo or something, then in the future you could kind of focus there. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of these mega adventures. But I have found sometimes running them all at once in a row can be kind of a slog. And by the end of it, the people are like, we're done with the Nile Empire. We want to go somewhere else. So it can also be good to split it up a bit and take it apart. And I think that possibly due to the reason Leamon just mentioned as to why it's 7 acts, this is probably the easiest mega adventure, in my opinion, to split up and take pieces apart and even have maybe different teams doing different things. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with all of the mega adventures. It doesn't have to be just run it from Act 1 to Act 7, boom, you're done. But yeah, we made intro beta characters for this, and it wasn't much preamble.
Mark, what were any notable things when you were prepping or getting your players' characters, so they're Storm Knights, ready to start this adventure?
So I've run this, I think, now 3 times. And I disagree with Jay on the disassembling part. I like this one as a run from a complete story from beginning to end. You can certainly take the Delphi Council missions or the Delphi missions books that are Cosm specific and review the stuff that's in there. And there are a number of missions in there that play off certain settings and scenes that are in Fires of Ra, and you can drop them in and make them side quests, if you will, or insert other things and expand it to become a much larger story if that's what you want to do. Like there's the movie theater, or not the movie theater, the movie studio. I think that one appears in a couple of places in the Delphi missions. I'm sure that Hooded Cobra does, and I think Lady Hourglass does, and certainly the League does in various forms. But for all 3 times I've run this, it's been brand new beta characters, or not brand new beta, brand new alpha characters all 3 times, and I think it went really, really well. Good. This is, in my opinion, if you're a new game master, this is a great first adventure. The Nile Empire is, in my opinion, a very forgiving Cosm for new Storm Knights and game masters, for that matter, because you've got so many things that just allow for, why did this happen? Well, because it's dramatic, or it's just, it's not coincidence. It's just how the Nile Empire operates. So we pretty much started everything from scratch and just started them off, brand new characters from the beginning.
So I have both game mastered this and played it actually under Mark. As Mark said, when we started off with brand new characters. When I game mastered, I was in a similar situation as Jay. I was actually taking my group through Relics of Power Redux, and the first 2 acts of that were released. And then the next 3 acts, so then 3, 4, and 5 were released. And then 6 was going to deal with the Nile Empire, but it hadn't been released to us playtesters yet. So we playtested through acts of 1 through 5, and I knew that the next one was going to be Nile, but we hadn't got the material yet. So I started them in this because I figured then at least they're going to be in Nile. And when we were partway through Act 1, then that got released. So I actually although I have played it straight through and it was great, I also, when I game mastered, I was more into finishing Relics of Power through play testing. So I did Acts 1 and 2 of Fires of Ra with that group, and then they went and continued their Relics, and then years later with a different group, I had their group finish the Fires of Ra from 3 through 7, based off of what the first group did. So it was like, hey, the Delphi Council went to the group, or I don't have the Delphi Council, sorry, my Circle of Knights, but it's a stand-in for it, went to the group and was like, hey, the other group did this, blah, 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 and now we've gotten there's occurrences that are happening, but because of what happened with the other group, and we'll spoil that when we talk about Relics of Power, but the other group was not fit for missions any longer. So you guys get to do this. So that's kind of where I was going, was we were play testing Relics of Power, and then we got play test for Fires of Ra, and I kind of split it up so I could do what I could in the amount of time. And then a couple of years later, or whenever, then went through to organized play and actually played it under Mark. So the kind of the setup for this is the villain is trying to get his hands on a artifact known as the Eye of Sebek, which says it's a legendary gem from the Egypt that never was. It gives a possession of who had it. So basically, the villain of this part of the adventure, the Hooded Cobra, his group is trying to get it, and the Storm Knights know he is trying to do something bad, and they're trying to prevent him, but they don't know exactly what he's trying to get. So the adventure and the the first act, Crime City, starts in Venice, Italy, which is actually a core Earth dominant zone. Most of core Earth is not pure; it's actually dominant Earth. Just one of the interesting, unique things about the core Earth reality and cosm is that most of it is considered dominant, not pure, except for the mixed zones around because of the invading realms. But this takes place in Venice in a night at the museum. So do you have any memories or anything about the museum?
Yeah, a few things. First of all, Mark did he reminded me when he started talking about the Delphi missions. I did actually run my group through Cats of Khartoum first, as like a little test run for the group, which did actually become important later in the adventure in Khartoum, right? So yeah, I did do a little bit of setup. I guess it's coming back. It was a while ago.
It's been a while.
So this is Act 1 is the sort of Cairo act. It's supposed to focus more on it's called Crime City. So it's focusing more on the gangs and everything. And for me and for one of my players, I like running Cairo as like a film noir kind of deal, and it's kind of both of our favorite parts. So a lot of things happened in this one. So it starts off the first scene in a museum, and I think it's interesting because you mentioned that the Storm Knights don't really know what they're after, but it's one of those things where it does actually say in here what it is, and it says that they need a Waz, and most people have no idea what that means, but there is in like the Nile source book, Waz scepter is a thing. It's mentioned under the engineering. So I like that was included. If someone was really into the Nile Empire, they might be able to figure out what that actually was. My players did not. So it starts off with the players, like the Storm Knights, basically robbing the museum, like to get this canopic jar that has the Waz scepter in it. So they just know that the Hooded Cobra is coming in for this jar. They don't really know what's in it. And the way it's set up is it's kind of like they're supposed to break in and get it first.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not how I ran it, because mere months previous, I had run an Infiniverse exchange adventure called The Widow's Lament. It's a Ororsh one, but it does kind of go into a bunch of other realms. I highly recommend it. I believe they did actually update it for once the Ororsh book came out, so it is current. I really liked it, but one of the scenes in that was very similar, where you are in a core Earth museum and robbing it, and have to avoid the guards and everything. So we had almost done this exact setup just a few months ago. So I changed it that the Delphi Council actually, this is core Earth, the Delphi Council actually has some pull.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just literally sent in there, and the security guards were with them. They were there as observers and basically setting everything up, knowing that these villains were going to show up at some point. But then they did in a very extreme Nile Empire way, which totally blew the minds of all the core Earth security guards. And there was a lot of fighting, and this was the first time I got to play the Hooded Cobra music from the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've mentioned before, I basically, every time the Hooded Cobra would show up, I would play that music. And it would piss them off so much. One of the characters, one of the Storm Knights is a core
I
Earth.
love that, by the way. I wish I had done that. That's fantastic.
One of the characters is a core Earth Storm Knight, like a Realm Runner, and he is basically like a deranged Australian special forces soldier who specializes in heavy weapons, but does not get the whole, like, he just goes out of his way to murder any Nile villains he finds, and then when they pop up again, he gets really pissed off about it, right? And, he's kind of like a alcoholic, and there's a whole bunch of issues. Anyways, so every time I would play that music, he would just start like screaming in the air and everything, and like firing grenades at him. But the beginning is just like a nice little fight, and because it's in core Earth, it does give the players a pretty good advantage. Mm-hmm. Core Earth Cosm cards are good for players. The Law of the Underdog and everything. Although my players didn't really get the Law of the Underdog because they were being helped. Still, it's relatively safe. And then there is a chase that kind of performs one of those cardinal sins of saying, okay, well, he's got to get away with this. It's like, okay, and then they blow up his boat on turn 2. And you have to figure it out. So they recovered the jar, and luckily, it's not the actual big thing. It's just one of many possible ones, so that helps them figure it out. It was a good one. It was actually one of the better chases, I think, in this adventure. Boat chase, which is not something that happens all the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a nice little intro. It's basically just a little bit of what's going on, and then a relatively easy fight and a chase for the first scene.
Yeah, Mark, do you have any thoughts or remembrances of your various groups going through night at the museum?
Oh yeah, if I duck off, I'm having a sneezing fit. So that's why I keep ducking off, because I don't want to do that on camera, because it's sneezing fit. So the first act to me is a really good act to get everybody into the mood of Fires of Ra. Scene 1. You've got, when I opened up, I didn't give them any benefit. I kind of did it like a James Bond secret agent thing, where the authorities don't really know who you are. So if you get caught, they're going to think you're bad guys too. You just hurry up and go. And so they're kind of on the clock, if you will, because they know they're in a race against time, because the Hooded Cobra and his crowd is trying to go after the same thing they're trying to get, and you don't really know what it is, but it's here, and you go wherever he is, and when he's after, don't let him get it. Mm-hmm. And so they have to figure out how to break in. And as we've said in earlier in earlier podcasts, you don't always have to solve all the problems. I didn't have to figure out how they were going to break in. I presented them with a 1940s-esque Egyptian museum in Venice and said, okay, you have to get in. How are you going to get in? And they solved that problem for me. I think universally everybody went to the roof, and there's always a skylight, and so that's how they got in. They got in through the skylight. Um, the in prepping for all of this, you absolutely need to read your box text, because the box text, there's a lot of things that you're like, well, how do we get from one place to the other? And if you're not sure how things occurred or why things are going the way they are, sometimes there's box text that just, this is how you're in the Delphi Council briefing room in wherever that happens to be, North America, wherever, and then all of a sudden you're in Venice. How did we get there? Doesn't matter. You're in Venice. I mean, if you want to role play that and you want to play it out, knock yourself out. I just hand waved it and said, okay, so you've had your debriefing, or your briefing rather. What are your the way Torganized play works for requisitions? You can only have a requisition from the cosm you're in, or the cosm you're going to, and that's almost always core Earth and someplace else. And in this case, your requisitions, you're allowed to request something from core Earth or the Nile Empire, because it doesn't make sense to, why would I requisition something that comes from Cyber Papacy when I'm not starting there, I'm not going to pass through there, and I'm not going to end up there. So that's how we deal with that, was that we limit everybody to that. So your requisitions. And I just went from the briefing to Venice, and you're staring at the museum. And where do you want to be? You've gotten to Venice, you've taken transportation to the museum. Where would you like to be? And universally, everybody's like, where's the front door? Can we see the roof? What's on the roof? And so, okay, sure, you're in a neighboring building. Hand wave all of that, because getting into the museum is, can I sneak onto the roof? Yes, you can. Give me a stealth roll. Group stealth. Everybody's on the roof. If you want to be, if you want to split the party and have some go in the front door and a B&E team come in from the top, sure, whatever. Stealth rolls, lock picking to open the glass, or even hand wave it, since it's 1942 and modern, or 1940s, whatever date it is, and how hard is it to pick the latch for somebody who's from our time? No big deal. As Jay pointed out, this is a very nice chase, and I ran the chase in the museum with the fight and the shock troopers all at one time, because I think it's interesting to have the fight going on while you're counting or looking for your A, B, C, and D on the chase to do the steps. And what I ended up doing was, I ran the chase as you're chasing. Think of the cinematic, the shot where everybody's going after the same thing, and it's being kicked around the dance floor or whatever, and it goes under the table, and then it goes over here, and you're chasing after it, and somebody has it, and then somebody bumps them, and it gets knocked over here. And so the chase is, everybody's chasing after the canopic jar as it's scooting around, whatever. And the shock troopers, the shock troopers, Nile Empire shock troopers, are fantastic mooks that are very limited threats to your Storm Knights. I don't care, they're fresh out of the newly minted greenish grass Storm Knights. Shock troopers present almost no threat to them, and they feel very, very much as if they are a threat because of the way they present. They just, numerically, the stats on the page, they're not. And they look great because there's a lot of them. They've got guns, and they've long bursts, and they're firing and shooting and all this stuff. And so it gets the dice rolling, gets the blood pumping and everything. And then Hooded Cobra shows up, right? And he's all that. Hooded Cobra. Love Hooded Cobra because everybody hates Hooded Cobra. But he is absolutely expected to escape. I mean, so much so that you just kind of don't even have stats for him. You can just, off you go. And he escapes. If you want to, you can put him at risk in Scene 1, Act 1. And the nice thing about Fires of Ra, and this goes on throughout the entire book, and if you want to do it, you can. You just have to prep. You have to know who the league is and who everybody in the league is, and you have to kind of set them up in order of dominance or positions of, if this one goes down, this is the next one that takes over. And so if you want to put them at risk and let people have a little, like if they take Hooded Cobra out, capture him, kill him, whatever, who's next? You have to know who that is, because the next time Hooded Cobra appears throughout the book, he is a reoccurring villain. And in true Nile Empire fashion, I mean, unless you're holding him in your hand, there is a reason why he's not in custody. And you can make it up however you want. And he can reappear time and time again. But that gets trite, and it gets old in a hurry. If your Storm Knights capture him 3 times, and he's still showing up a 4th time, you're like, well, what's the point? Why should I even capture him this time? You know, somebody's going to get really frustrated, and they're going to do the Trinity and the Matrix, dodge this, and just cap him right there. And then what are you going to do? You know, you got to clone him or whatever. And that, I mean, they're just going to get bored with that. So you can let him get captured, whacked, whatever, and then have somebody else step in and take over the league and be your big bad. You just have to know that from whatever point in the book you do that, every time it says Hooded Cobra, it means whoever you have in the leadership role. So it takes a little prep work for the GM. It can be done. It's a lot of fun. We're just doing scene 1 right now?
Yeah, we're just
the museum.
Yeah, we're just doing the night at the museum right now.
Yeah, the big thing you're going to have to watch out is you get caught up in the chase. And I kind of did 2 chases. I did a chase for the canopic jar, and then I did the boat chase to catch Hooded Cobra as he gets away with his. If you win the chase, Hooded Cobra gets away, but you can catch Lady Hourglass or the canopic jar, and you can come out ahead on that one. But he gets away via helicopter. He just doesn't get the prize unless you lose the chase, in which case he does. But you may have to drop a hint about Shafira Azar and being in Cairo. Otherwise, like, where do we go next? So you just got to pay attention to that one at the end of the scene.
So yeah, for my my GM experience, my group, I had, like I said, they were going through Relics of Power, and I think they had stopped on Tharcold. So it wasn't that big of a jump to get to Venice, because they were on the western part of Russia. And then they learn about, hey, this villain, this Nile villain is showing up at Venice. We need you to do this, sneaking into the museum, which the group did really well. And then I had the Hooded Cobra, and there's pictures of him all throughout the adventure, which are pretty good. He has a cobra cowl type thing that really reminded me of Serpentor from G.I. Joe. So I used that personality, but I gave him a really bad Chris Latta Cobra Commander voice. So whenever he showed up, he would always, scream out in a very as high-pitched voice as I could, I am the Hooded Cobra!
Yeah. Yeah.
And
get them, goddamn!
And very much like Jay's music, the players just absolutely came to despise anytime the Hooded Cobra popped up, which is great, when you make your player, not necessarily like you make your players just hate you, but when you make when you make your players hate a villain, it always is more emotional and impactful, in my opinion. That's why I don't like the big bad end guy is never around in any way, shape, or form, and just at the end of the adventure. No, I like sprinkling them throughout an adventure, and if I do read an adventure and that happens, I will intentionally change other characters to be him or her in disguise, and then make sure that the players find out about it, so then they get emotionally invested. So this really sets up that emotional investment against the Hooded Cobra. When I had him appear, he went through the skylight along with all of his shock troopers, grabbed the jar. As Jay mentioned, there is kind of a reverse Deus Ex Machina, because it's not for the Storm Knights, it's for the Hooded Cobra, where he's getting away in the helicopter no matter what. It's just, is he going to find out what's in the jar and yell no, no, or is he going to take the jar away and the Storm Knights not necessarily know what's in the jar? And as anybody who's been listening to these know, I don't like chases, so I didn't have it as a chase. I just had the helicopter come and take him away. But
if I can point out, don't let your players know that he's supposed to get away.
Right.
It will become evident that he is going to get away, whether they, if you can work it into whatever they're doing, that he did something better so that he got away. So it doesn't feel like, I'm keeping you from, you can't, no matter what you do, you can't get this guy. That's much better. Don't let them know that he's supposed to get away.
Right. So I had it seem, again, working, you're behind the screen magic, made it seem like it was, if we would have did that, we would have been able to stop him.
Yep.
And then he got away through the skylight that, had the helicopter ladder coming down. Mark did make a good point. If you just leave it at that and don't really get with some of the details in there, your players will have no idea how to progress on to scene 2, which does go into the Nile Empire. So you're leaving Venice, you are going into Cairo.
They tell you that in the mission brief. Nakatomi ends the mission brief by, after that, go see her.
Right.
And that's the last time they tell you about her. And so you get caught up in all this other stuff, and you're like, well, we didn't get any clues as to where to go next. Well, you did. You were told, after you do this thing, go meet with your contact over here.
Right.
But I found frequently everybody was like, I don't know what we're supposed to do now.
I at least have a couple of players who take at least halfway decent notes, so they were able to then go back, look at their notes. Oh yeah, that's right. We're supposed to go meet this person in Cairo. So let's move on to scene 2, Wise Guys. So this, again, it's actually taking place in the Nile Empire, a dominant zone. So most everything will, or say 75-80% of things will be Nile Empire. You'll have your rare, every once in a while something will still be core earthy. You might have that modern car on the street, or that modern building, the TV tower or antenna or something, but for the most part you're looking at Nile Empire. Wise Guys, looking through it real fast, is meeting up with the contact of Shafira Azar.
Or trying to.
Yeah, trying to.
At Mix, a gin joint in Old Cairo. So any thoughts on scene 2, Wise Guys, Jay?
So I basically narrated them from scene 1 to scene 2. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a point where they were like, what do we do now? As soon as Cobra got away, or his boat blew up, or whatever it was that actually happened, they basically checked the canopic jar and weren't really sure what to do. I immediately just started into so you guys go back, report into Snowflake, and you are sent, and it then sort of like re-said what it was they were supposed to be doing, and then sort of narrate them like getting into Cairo. So skip over all that, right? Just narrate them into it. And this scene is funny because I think if I was to do it again now, it would be a much longer scene. I don't think I had read Secrets of the Nile Empire yet, so I didn't really know too much about the different crime families. Mm-hmm. And this is a scene that could almost become an entire adventure. or at least the start
The
of
beginning
one.
of one, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
because it gives you a lot of ins, but you could add a lot more diplomacy and like a lot of other different gang families and everything. The idea is that you go to meet her, you can't find her, um, and there's a bunch of gangsters there, and they know what happened to her because they basically sold her out to Professor Plasmo.
Plasmo.
Yeah, yeah, and they're just sitting there laughing about it. And one of my characters, the cyber papacy character, Zoe she was Hell's Angel, basically a cyber papacy character that likes beating up Tharkoldu. But she was the first of these that Leamon talked about a long time ago. So she was a influencer character before everything came down, and then so she would sort of like record all of her adventures and then release it into the godnet afterwards, right? But so she had a super high intimidate, and basically they just walked up, slapped those guys around for a bit, got their answer, and then the other mobsters showed up, and the party was just like, all right, peace, and left. Like they just snuck out, and the whole thing took like 20 minutes. So it was like this scene basically did not happen for me, but I could see like you could get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of how much you prep or your players get into it.
Yeah.
So, Mark, what are your thoughts on Scene 2 Wise Guys?
Scene 2 to me is a very much scene setting Nile Empire scene, because it's the old school speakeasy gin joint. Think the Emoteps from the third Mummy. I think it's the third Mummy movie. The any speakeasy you've ever seen in a Chicago thing, just pick that up, stick it down into this spot right here. Any of the old school 40s bars that you've seen in Indiana Jones, perfect setting. And you've got this, if you put some time into the setup of the artifacts and the characters and the threats that are in this, you can rebrand this in any place you want to go in Nile Empire and use it as any gin joint, any bar that you want to use, because they're always going to be very similar. You're going to have the bartender who knows what's going on. You're going to have the cocktail waitresses and cigar girls walking around. You're going to have the games of chance, the gambling casino, whatever. You're going to have the mobsters set up, and these are always elements, to a greater or lesser degree, they're going to be in these bar scenes. And so I once again transitioned from the boat chase with the scepter or the canopic jar, and they hand waved the travel, and they got there and they were outside of Mix, and I said, okay, you're standing outside of Mix, what would you like to do? And so they walked in and they began to look around, and I narrated, you see the bartender over here, and if they made their find, I almost said spot check. If they make their find, then they could notice the what's his name? Nassar Scars Ganem sitting at a table, clearly a gentleman of some means, sitting around with his cohorts and some thugs. They notice the toughs in the three-piece suits with obvious bulges under their arms being firearms. Some of the people at strategic points have Tommy guns, hidden if they make a good find, that kind of thing. Success levels matter. Give them more information about the guards scattered about, that this is actually an armed camp that they've walked into. Give them that kind of information if they want, and then you can have this great diplomatic round robin where they go talk to the bartender for a little bit. You can create a named waitress that they can get in good with, who can give them some information about, who's the guy in the corner, or the bartender can. If they just want to, if they're, let's do a frontal assault and knock the front door down, walk right up to the guy and start, going toe to toe. He's in his house, and so I didn't really let anybody try to intimidate him because this is his place, right? And he knows where all the guys are, and all the guys know who he is, and so you can't really intimidate him, but you could try and get information from him in other ways. And he was, I like using scars because there's an opportunity to save him or kill him, or he gets killed. And so if you want to build, like Jay said, this could be a great beginning for another story or an offshoot where you build some characters that later on, when you want to come back to the Nile Empire, you throw in scars as somebody they know, and in either a good way or a bad way. If they saved him, he owes them, and they maybe come back in and they can cash that chip in, if you will, and get a favor from him. Or he becomes, a character that shows up and says, "Hey, you did me this solid before, I need your help. I got no one to turn to, and this, that, and the other." And so you've got this flavor you've built up in this one adventure you can use somewhere else. And especially when they've already done the work for you by building these characters and giving you all of the background on who they are and everything, you flesh them out with your Storm Knights, and they take on a life of their own. And don't throw them away. Just kind of save them, set them aside, use them again when you need to, because the Nile Empire is a lot of fun. So I use this. It is an absolute, if you want to use it as an absolute momentary scene where they pop in, they discover where Shafir Azar has been held by Professor Plasmo, and then they engage in they get caught in the middle of a drive-by shooting, which, by the way, what's that card? What's the...
Suddenly?
Yeah, this is a great spot for suddenly. I mean, it's going to happen anyway, but what happens if there's a third gang? You could make it really interesting at that point. But it could be a very small scene and almost a hand wave, or you can make it into a much larger scene. It depends on what kind of group you have. If they like to do the face thing and they like to talk and role play, there's a lot of role play potential inside a mix. If they just want to get the information and roll dice and do the shootout and move on, you can do that too. It's up to you. However you want to play in your Cosmverse.
Yeah, I changed a little bit to kind of specify a little bit more. The Storm Knights go to this gen joint to find their supposed contact, and she has been kidnapped, and it's talking or finding out where she's been taken. That's basically what the Storm Knights need to figure out. But then a rival gang comes and ambushes the gang that's in control of this gen joint. So I had the rival gang because it was one of those where sometimes your players just start piddling around, or they start, hey, you use persuasion. No, I want to use intimidate. No, we don't. And they spent way too long trying to figure out how they were going to do the situation. And the Nile Empire should definitely not be just sitting around discussing how to do things. It should be doing the things.
Law of action.
Yeah, the law of action. Game masters kick in that law of actions, and then I had the Hajar enforcers come in while they were trying to figure out what to do. And then started, and, hey, as Mark said, they have a choice. Do they help Scars? Do they help the Hajar? If they help the people coming, if they help the ambushers, then they might be able to find the information on the dead bodies. If they help out the Scars and the people that are with the Baz brothers, then they that's what my group did, and then they gave them the information afterwards. But they have that, and it says, use the wise guy accent, and they make some bad jokes, kind of.
She's hanging out.
Yeah, she's hanging out. She's gonna have a blast, and they kind of set up little foreshadowing of what's going to happen into the next scene. So it wasn't like, they got saved and all of a sudden they're good guys. Oh, thank you very much. Here's the information. No, they were still giving it, and they're, still doing their wisecracking and such like that. So, yeah, of course, if your players are gonna make this longer, there's a difference between making it longer and getting cool role-playing and stuff instead of just dragging it out or piddling around and not doing anything, and that's kind of the difference. My group was let's piddle around, so then I enacted the law of action to get that over with. And then basically what it is, the hanging around and going to have a blast leads into scene 3, A View to Die For, which I'll let you both talk about it again, but I just loved this next scene. This next scene was one of my favorite scenes ever, and basically the damsel in distress is in the 2030s style of being tied up to a building with a bomb that's going to explode. So that is A View to Die For. So Jay, your thoughts on A View to Die For?
I agree. This is one of probably the most Nile Empire scenes that's been printed. I believe my memory of it is the players really liked it. It started off a little slow because they had to get there, and there was a time factor. And this began one of the adventure long running jokes when they played a connection card, and I had to quickly just come up with an NPC. The Delphi Council brought this guy out called Nafti Mubarak, who was like a taxi driver that was a contact. So he, showed up. He's like, friends, and they all piled into his taxi, and he would drive around. But then from then on, for the rest of this adventure, anytime a connection card was played, it was one of his brothers somewhere else. All right, so
nice.
They eventually had Rafty, who had a boat.
Rafty, nice.
Yeah, so they were all Afties. So it was like this long running joke. But anyway, so he drives them there, and I don't remember how it happened. I found my pages on Roll20 so I could see the picture. Somehow, Zoe was flying. I think they must have requisitioned a jetpack or used a Delphi support card or something to get one. So the cyborg with the GWI Godhammer and the strength of 13, plus all, and so this is actually why last week I had packages in my mind. It was because we were play testing the packages. So I was like looking over all this stuff. I was like, oh my god, this is disgusting. And so she went up to go deal with Plasmo, because the idea here is that what's her name again? Shafira. Shafira had done like an expose on Plasmo, and he got arrested. And then, as one does in Cairo, he got out, right? And so he's having his revenge on her. So he's kidnapped her, he's tied her to this spire, and he's rigged the entire building, or at least the top half, with explosives that are set to go off. And so you have a few things going on. There's a DSR to disarm the explosives. Meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of Plasmo bots running around down there to stop anyone. And in the meantime, Professor Plasmo himself is like flying around in his jetpack, basically taunting everybody or blasting them, from a distance. So things probably didn't go the way Professor Plasmo anticipated, as far as my group was concerned, because they had a jetpack and Zoe zoomed up there and just started wailing on him with a hammer. Meanwhile, we also had a Gold Sun optent named Akrik, and he liked to cast Flame Aura on himself. So he would just turn himself into fire and run in the middle and then the plasma bots, when they attacked him, just basically killed themselves, and they're just dumb robots, Nile Empire. So he was kind of the distraction, while the others, the Jack, who's that core Earth merc, and then we also had an Orosh like alchemist. So he knew science, so he could actually work on disarming. Between the special forces guy with demolitions and the alchemist with science, the two of them could work on diffusing all of the bombs. So they were able to get everything dealt with. If memory serves, Plasmo was actually somehow stuck to the spire himself, and they replaced him. I don't remember actually what happened to Plasmo, but they rescued her relatively easy. But there was a brief moment that the Plasmo bots, they do have ranged weapons, so they were getting a few hits off near the beginning before Akrik was able to sort of round up a bunch of them in melee. They only do 10 damage, but it depends on the kind of characters that you've got. Sometimes 10 is all you really need, especially if you're using the combined action rules when there's a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. But it was not a super dangerous, although memory serves, they almost failed the DSR. But the actual encounter wasn't that dangerous, so it was a good Nile, like, let's get going, boom, boom, boom. And as it should be, it is just a standard encounter. And it's kind of like the best introduction to the Nile that there is, I think.
Mark, your thoughts on A View to Die For?
Yeah, this is a great culmination of the previous two acts, in that you've had very much Nile Empire action in scene one, or excuse me, scenes in scene one that leads to the very Nile Empire gin joint to get a piece of information that leads to the very Nile Empire damsel in distress strapped to it's a rotating restaurant at the top of the tower, and Plasmo, because you can't just strap a bomb to them and blow them up or shoot them in the head, because that wouldn't be dramatic and interesting. And so he's built this bomb that, as the restaurant rotates, when it hits a certain point, that detonates the bomb. And so he's hovering around in his jetpack to gloat over her and watch her demise, when and sweat over this. She knows it's coming, and eventually it's going to happen. And so our heroes are running up the stairs, because the elevator's been disabled by plasma bots, and they're running up the stairs and get really tired when they get up there, and here are the plasma bots, and now you've got the DSR with the plasma bots, and you got to disable all of this and avoid getting crushed by the gears of the mechanism that rotates the restaurant. And I think in 2 out of the 3 runs that I did, I had the misfortune of turning over like an A, B, C, and D card on the DSR, and so it was just like, okay, the DSR is done, and then they just slaughtered the plasma bots, because, as Jay pointed out, they're not that big a deal. The coolest thing about the plasma bots is that they're robots that the players don't recognize or know what they do, but as soon as they take a hit from one of those plasma rays, they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad, oh, I got this, and then they wade into them, and it's doom for the plasma bots. Professor Plasmo, I think in all 3 instances, died. They just blew him up. His jetpack, I think, detonated a couple of times, and he was killed or passed out and then plummeted to his doom. I think twice. No, his jetpack blew up once, and twice he fell in, because this is on a I think it's Zamalek Island. Is this Zamalek in the middle of the Nile River? I may be getting ahead of myself, but I think there's a body of water, the Nile River or something like that, is real close by, and he falls into the water and disappears. So you can have Professor Plasmo come back if you want, because there's no body, no dead guy, right? Because it's Nile Empire. My biggest problem with the whole scene is that you get a lot of backstory information on Shafira at the end of the scene, which is all valuable stuff, but it's like, okay, it's an info dump, because she's not going to hide anything. She's very grateful you saved her, and all 3 of my tables, I think, saved her. Although there was a close call, I think they almost, one of them almost crapped the bed with a bad roll on the DSR. But they all saved her, and so she's not going to not tell you like the 4 paragraphs of information that you've been given. And so here you go with this info dump at the end of scene 3 leading into scene 4, as she leads you into scene 4 because she ends up taking you back. I think, doesn't she take you back to
to her office,
the Clarion?
Yeah.
And it is on Zamalek Island.
Yeah. And so she's getting, I mean, she's you don't have to draw it. To me, it's stupid to it's good role playing to let the characters have a conversation with Shafira, and then here you have all of this information that as they talk, if you ought to kind of look for some high points about, or trigger words in the information, so that when they mention certain things, you can info dump this in a much more natural way, instead of just going, okay, here's what Shafira tells you, and then you read all of this. That to me is a very clunky way to do it. Just let them go back and forth and in the conversations discover this information. And if they're not very role play Storm Knights, and they're just like, okay, take us back to your lair, and that's all they say, well, you kind of don't have a choice. In the as you travel to the Cairo Clarion, Shafira reveals these things, and then you can give it to them.
Yeah, I really like this. The way that I normally do the subplot cards, so cards like Romance and Nemesis and all of those, is I have the players play them, and then I just weave them into the story as I fit. So I don't do it where they go, oh, I want to play a Romance on that person, or I want to do a Nemesis on that person. They play it, and then I write it down, and sometime in the future it happens, and it could be that scene. It could be 2 acts from now, so that they don't know when it's coming up. It's just something that I did with Classic Torg, because again, I play with 8 players, so I have to space things out.
You have challenges the rest of us do not.
Right, and there are times when it's like, okay, you have my list. You have 5 different subplots, so let's wheel and deal. Do you want some extra possibilities or something? Because I can't deal with you having this many subplots when everybody else has this. So I had a player who his character was a weird scientist, that he was like a doctor. I want to say it was like Dr. Von Hossing or something like that. And I decided that the Professor Plasmo was going to be his failed student, who was a TA, who the doctor, the Storm Knight, had ripped apart his dissertation so that he did not get his PhD. And so when Professor and what made it even to me made it even better was, if you look at Professor Plasmo's like gadget, his equipment, he has a mind ray gun and a rocket pack, and I also gave him a force field belt because it's a Nemesis, so you wanted a little. But I made the player had made a Storm Knight with the Gizmoteer and Gadgeteer, weird scientist. There was like 3 different weird science-y perks that you can get, and he had all of them at this point. And I made Professor Plasmo have just like 1 extra thing to each of those. So every round he also did a taunt against the Storm Knight to be like, that force field belt is so outdated. Mine's, improved with an extra 2 charges, and did that, and just like, again, made it more emotional, linked it more to the character, where the Storm Knight hated his fail, the ex-student who decided that he would become better than the doctor, and yeah, it also, as Mark said, it's at the top of this restaurant at the top of this building that it spins, and I had the doctor had a jetpack, and we had a Stallinger who can fly, so they flew up, but everybody else had to go through and take the elevator. I think I even had one character decide to like climb the outside to get up there, to try to get faster. So the party was immediately split, and while the plasma bots aren't that great, they have a decent toughness, and my characters were beta characters, and I had 16 GM possibilities. So this actually
you were juicing stuff up.
Because, yeah, hits were doing more damage because I was boosting action. The professor, soaked a bit more so that he could laugh at the Storm Knight and that. And it brought it really fun to bring back a thing. And a player side note, that player is actually a university professor that made a weird scientist doctor, and so he understood exactly what I was doing. And so I was pushing those buttons both to him and his character. So very, very fun. Really loved that scene.
If I can, I was poking through my notes, and I found the notes from the streaming table when we did it for the stream. So I because this is going to come up later, I want to point out that in Act 1, we had we had a character called Lone Rocket Ranger. He made a Rocket Ranger in the Nile Empire, and so he had the jetpack, and he flew up and he fought Plasmo. Well, in the beginning and scene in the Night of the Museum stuff, he played he played Nemesis on Lady Hourglass, and then he played Romance on her.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the very beginning of this book, we have this Rocket Ranger, Captain America Nile Empire style, play Nemesis and Romance on Lady Hourglass. That will be important later because and I made the note of it.
Sensing a trend.
Oh, dude, this is possibly, it's definitely in my top 3 role-playing events of all time. Could be the best.
And it was an arc. It wasn't just like a couple of scenes or an act.
Yeah.
It was the entire adventure.
And this is why I'm mentioning it, because Lone Rocket Ranger, he presented to me, where did it go? He gave me his hidden, he says, he had a hidden backstory, which is important, okay? So this is what I know that they don't know at the time. He says, I have a hidden backstory. The Lone Rocket Ranger, quotes, says that he was the sole survivor of an ambush by the forces of Dr. Mobius. In reality, that's what he tells people. In reality, he is a former shock trooper who became disillusioned and wants to be a good guy. So he stole a rocket pack uniform, gizmos, and all that stuff from an actual ambushed Rocket Ranger squad. And he took on that mantle, right? And that's why he wears a mask, so that nobody knows that he's a deserted shock trooper, right? So if his mask, he's told me this at the beginning, he says, if my mask comes off, he could potentially be recognized as a shock trooper named Point Dexter Stormfallow. The point is, as a purpose coming from Terra could be different. So this is set the stage at the beginning. He's told me at the very beginning of Act 1, Scene 1 that he's a shock trooper that's taken on this Rocket Ranger pack to be a good guy because he's disillusioned now, right? And then he plays Nemesis and Romance on Lady Hourglass in that very first part. And off we go to the races, right? And we had no idea this was coming.
Yeah.
And we as players, the other players, had no idea. And immediately when he started showing favoritism, started, accusing him of being secretly a bad guy without knowing that he previously was a bad guy.
Yep.
And like you're shooting, 45s and you're rolling your decks, you're not rolling fire what?
Yeah.
Yeah. excuse, and we're just like, okay, buying it hook, line, and sinker, but we just kept doing it, and then way in the future, as we'll get there, when it came out, it was just like, yeah, everything fell into place.
And it was organic. It was 100% organic. So anyway, let's get back to it.
That is scene 3, A View to Die For. I think is really cool. And actually, looking at the time, that is about the time that we have.
Oh wow, this is gonna take.
It's gonna take a long time.
It takes about as many sessions. Where it takes about 2 sessions to get through an act.
It will.
Well, before I forget, then, because I was gonna make a quick little addendum into the next scene, but it's not as epic as this. As the Nemesis thing, but I did remember also going through some notes that Zoe has the famous perk, so because of her live streaming shows, and that's what let her get the connection card for free.
Okay, right.
So Nafty, this Nile Empire cabbie, was somehow a fan of hers. So then I had to like think about, okay, so how have her videos been getting distributed in the Nile Empire? And basically had to come up with this like whole rogue pirate film crew that was like splicing previews onto like the official movies and stuff, which comes into play next scene. But yeah, I just wanted to remember to mention that before I forgot.
But yeah, it sounds like all 3 of us used cards and other things that occurred in the game to weave into stuff that we're going to talk about in the future.
Yeah, so and this is really for Game Masters. This is why you want to take notes when they play stuff like Romance and Nemesis and Contacts, and when. If you're going to spend the time, absolutely. If you're going to spend the time or if they're going to make you spend the time to come up with a named NPC because they decided, I have a gaming group that I run with that loves to torture me with what's his name, right? And they just want a name for everybody. They don't care if they're ever going to see him again, but they like to try and make you come up with name after name after name after name after name. Don't waste them. Write them down, and then pop them back up later so that the AFTI Taxi Consortium shows up across Cosms, because I would totally have them show up. A couple of their brothers are Realm Runners, and they show up in the Cyber Papacy. Oh yeah, that's Uncle Nafty. I know him. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
So, we do. Thank you for listening and or watching this episode. We will continue. We've just scratched the surface of the Fires of Ra, but those first 3 scenes are pretty good, and that scene 3 is just excellent in our opinions. Do write us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we'll read your email. We'll answer questions. We'll comment on comments, etc. But until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.